Science fiction has often been associated with optimism. New worlds, advanced technology, and the belief that progress naturally leads to something better. But alongside those hopeful visions exists a different strain of storytelling. These films did not imagine the future as an achievement. They imagined it as a warning. This video focuses on science fiction action films that portrayed tomorrow as a failure. Not a sudden collapse, but a gradual outcome shaped by poor decisions, misplaced priorities, and systems that evolved faster than human values. In these stories, technology does not save society. It exposes its weaknesses. Order does not protect people. It isolates, replaces, or controls them. The films in this list share a common perspective. They suggest that progress, when driven by efficiency alone, can strip away purpose, identity, and responsibility. War becomes permanent. Justice becomes mechanical. Human connection becomes optional. These futures are not defined by spectacle, but by direction, by where society ends up when convenience, control, or survival become the dominant goals. This countdown does not include science fiction built around wonder exploration or heroic triumph. It focuses instead on action-driven films that placed human beings inside systems they could no longer fully influence. Some were dismissed on release as excessive, cynical, or exaggerated. Others were seen as entertainment-first ideas, second. Yet many of their concerns now feel less speculative and more structural. The criteria for this list is simple. Each film presents a future shaped by human choices rather than alien forces or unavoidable fate. Each one highlights a point where progress continues, but direction is lost. And each reflects anxieties that have only grown more relevant over time about power, technology, control, and what gets left behind when systems work exactly as designed. These are not predictions in the strict sense, they are scenarios. And the reason they still matter is not because they were right about details, but because they were honest about outcomes. The question is not whether these films exaggerated the future. The question is whether they recognized it too early. 1. Johnny Mnemonic, 95. Johnny Mnemonic presents a future where information has become the world's most valuable resource and the human mind is the final storage device. Technology does not replace people. It turns them into infrastructure. Memory, identity, and privacy become commodities. The film depicts a society overwhelmed by data, yet unable to solve its most basic problems. Corporations control information flows, while disease, inequality, and social breakdown spread unchecked. Connectivity is everywhere, but meaning is scarce. Knowledge exists in excess, wisdom does not. The core idea of the film is commodification of the self. Human thought is no longer personal. The brain becomes hardware to be rented, modified, and discarded. Technology promises empowerment, but delivers dependency. Identity becomes transactional. What makes this future unsettling is how voluntary the transformation is. People adapt because participation is rewarded. Resistance is inconvenient. The line between user and system disappears not through force, but through necessity. Released in the mid-1990s, Johnny Mnemonic was criticized for excess and confusion. Viewed today, its vision feels sharply relevant. Data defines power and humanity adjusts accordingly. In this future, tomorrow fails. Not because technology overwhelms humanity, but because humanity merges with it until there is nothing left to distinguish the two. 2. Judge Dredd, 1995. Judge Dredd imagines a future where justice has been streamlined into an automated system of authority. Law is no longer debated, interpreted, or challenged. It is enforced instantly by individuals who embody the system itself. Speed replaces judgment. Certainty replaces fairness. The film is set in overcrowded megacities where crime is constant and institutions respond by removing human discretion from the legal process. Judges act as police, jury, and executioner. Context becomes irrelevant. The rulebook matters more than the people it governs. The central idea of the film is absolutism. Once justice becomes mechanical, error becomes unavoidable. Authority concentrates into systems that cannot admit fault or self-correct. Efficiency creates the illusion of safety while amplifying the consequences of mistakes. What makes this future disturbing is its logic. Faced with chaos, society chooses certainty over complexity. Moral responsibility is outsourced to procedure. Power becomes insulated from accountability because it no longer appears human. Released during a period of rising concern about crime and law enforcement, Judge Dredd reflected fears about unchecked authority. Its warning remains clear. When justice loses empathy, it also loses legitimacy. In this world, tomorrow fails because law stops being human, and once that happens, it cannot correct itself. 3. Demolition Man, 1993. Demolition Man portrays a future that believes it has solved violence by eliminating risk. Crime has been reduced. Public behavior is regulated and society operates with impressive efficiency. On the surface, the system works. Beneath it, human expression has been flattened into something safe, predictable, and tightly managed. The film follows a clash between two eras, an uncontrolled past and a hyper-regulated future. Advanced technology monitors behavior, corrects speech, and discourages physical conflict. Citizens are conditioned to avoid discomfort and confrontation. Order is maintained not through force, but through design. The core idea of the film is control through comfort. Safety becomes the highest value, outweighing freedom, creativity, and dissent. Technology enforces harmony by removing extremes, but in doing so, it removes depth. Passion, risk, and individuality are treated as threats to stability rather than signs of life. What makes this future unsettling is its appeal. The system does not feel oppressive to those who benefit from it. Control is framed as responsibility. Freedom is redefined until it no longer resembles autonomy. Society trades unpredictability for calm and calls it progress. Released in the early 1990s, Demolition Man was often interpreted as satire. Viewed now, its vision feels more practical than exaggerated. When comfort becomes policy, control rarely feels like control. In this future, tomorrow fails because order succeeds too well, leaving humanity stable, safe, and quietly diminished. 4. Universal Soldier, 1992. Universal Soldier envisions a future where warfare is optimized by removing the human cost that once restrained it. Death is no longer final, memory is no longer permanent, and identity becomes optional. Conflict does not end. It becomes more efficient. The film presents a military system that reanimates fallen soldiers, erasing their past and programming them for obedience. Trauma is not healed, but deleted. Individual experience is treated as corrupted data. What remains is a functional body capable of carrying out orders without hesitation. The core idea of the film is dehumanization through practicality. There is no grand ideology driving the system, only logic. War becomes easier to sustain when loss is reversible and accountability is abstract. Violence continues because it no longer feels costly. What makes this future unsettling is its restraint. The system is not overtly cruel, it is effective. By removing memory and identity, it removes resistance. Soldiers are no longer participants in war, they are infrastructure. Released during a period of rapid military technological advancement, Universal Soldier reflected anxieties about automation and control. Its warning remains direct. When humanity removes pain and memory from conflict, it does not create peace. It creates permanence. In this future, tomorrow fails because war no longer requires belief, sacrifice, or consent, only functioning bodies inside a flawless machine. 5. The Puppet Masters, D4. The Puppet Masters presents a future where control does not arrive through conquest, but through infiltration. Society remains intact. Institutions function and daily life continues. Yet autonomy erodes from within, replaced by influence that is subtle, adaptive, and difficult to detect. The film follows the discovery of parasitic entities capable of attaching themselves to human hosts. These forces do not overthrow governments or destroy infrastructure. Instead, they integrate, redirecting behavior and loyalty without obvious resistance. Power operates invisibly, turning individuals into extensions of a system they do not fully understand. The central idea of the film is internal vulnerability. The structures designed to protect society, hierarchies, chains of command, trust, and authority become points of entry. Once influence replaces force, resistance becomes nearly impossible to identify. Control no longer needs violence to sustain itself. What makes this future disturbing is its plausibility. The threat succeeds not because humanity is weak, but because it relies on systems that assume good faith. Independence dissolves quietly, masked as normal function. By the time the danger is recognized, it is already embedded. Released in the mid-1990s, The Puppet Masters was overshadowed by louder alien narratives. Today, its warning feels sharper. The most effective control is the kind that does not announce itself. In this world, tomorrow fails because humanity loses autonomy without ever recognizing the moment it was surrendered. 6. Escape from New York, 1981. Escape from New York imagines a future where authority has not collapsed, but hardened into a system of containment. Society still operates, borders still exist, and order is officially maintained. Yet failure is no longer addressed or repaired. It is isolated, hidden, and permanently removed from public responsibility. The film is set in a world where crime is treated as an unsolvable problem, rather than rehabilitation or reform. The state responds by creating zones of abandonment. Entire populations are sealed off, stripped of political value, and left to survive without support. Stability is preserved elsewhere by sacrificing those deemed unmanageable. The core idea of the film is displacement rather than disorder. Society does not descend into chaos. It reorganizes itself by excluding its own failures. Control replaces accountability, and efficiency replaces moral responsibility. The system works precisely because it refuses to engage with the human cost of its solutions. What makes this future unsettling is how logical it appears from the perspective of power. The prison city is not presented as cruelty, but as policy. Once people are removed from visibility, their suffering no longer threatens the image of order. Stability is maintained by pretending loss does not exist. Released in the early 1980s. Escape from New York reflected fears about authoritarian responses to social instability. Viewed today, its warning feels sharper. When systems prioritize control over repair, exclusion becomes governance. In this future, tomorrow fails not through collapse, but through a decision to abandon parts of society and continue as if nothing was lost. 7. Road Warrior, 1981. Road Warrior imagines a future where society reorganizes itself around scarcity. Institutions disappear, laws dissolve, and identity becomes secondary to access. Civilization does not vanish. It simplifies into a hierarchy defined by resources, protection, and force. The film's world is shaped by competition over fuel territory and survival. Communities form not through shared values, but through mutual defense. Trust is temporary. Alliances last only as long as they remain useful. Violence is not chaotic. It is strategic and efficient. The core idea of Road Warrior is that scarcity reshapes morality. When resources define power, empathy becomes expendable. Survival rewards aggression, and restraint is treated as weakness. Civilization adapts by abandoning principles rather than preserving them. What makes this future unsettling is its logic. There is no attempt to restore institutions or imagine a broader future. The system works because it is ruthless. Stability is achieved through dominance, not cooperation. Humanity persists by narrowing its definition of worth. Released during a period of economic instability and energy anxiety, the film reflected real-world fears about dependency and collapse. Its future feels less speculative than structural. Remove abundance and society reorganizes accordingly. In Road Warrior, tomorrow fails. Not because humanity loses its tools, but because it rebuilds itself around the idea that only strength deserves to survive. 8. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. A Boy and His Dog. Dog depicts a future where civilization has not simply fallen, but inverted its values. Society still exists in fragments, yet the moral framework that once supported it has been stripped away. Order returns in distorted forms, shaped by fear control and survival rather than progress. The film contrasts two versions of post-apocalyptic society. The surface world is violent, transactional, and driven by immediate gratification. Underground communities claim refinement and structure, but enforce rigid conformity and authoritarian control. Neither represents advancement. Both are responses to collapse that sacrifice humanity in different ways. The central idea of the film is that rebuilding does not guarantee improvement. Intelligence, organization, and technology can return without restoring ethics or compassion. Survival encourages efficiency, not empathy. Power structures re-emerge quickly, often harsher than what came before. What makes this future disturbing is how casually cruelty is accepted. Exploitation is normalized. Autonomy is conditional. Moral compromise is treated as necessary adaptation. The film offers no comforting illusion that humanity becomes wiser through suffering. Released in the mid-1970s, A Boy and His Dog was often dismissed as provocative or nihilistic. Yet its warning remains sharp. When systems collapse completely, humanity does not reset to something better. It reveals its raw priorities. In this future, tomorrow fails because civilization returns without conscience, rebuilding structure while abandoning responsibility. 9. Damnation Alley, 1977. Damnation Alley presents a future that has survived catastrophe without recovering from it. Nuclear devastation is no longer unfolding. It has already happened. What remains is a world that continues to function at the most basic level, but without direction, ambition, or belief in renewal. Survival is no longer a stage on the way to rebuilding. It is the final objective. The film follows a small group traveling through hostile terrain in search of other survivors. Technology still exists, but only to preserve life in the short term. Vehicles move, weapons operate, and systems function, yet none of them point toward progress. The journey is not about restoring civilization, but about enduring its absence. The core idea of Damnation Alley is stagnation after disaster. The catastrophe did not create a new social order or inspire transformation. It produced inertia. Humanity keeps moving because stopping means death, not because movement leads anywhere meaningful. The future is reduced to maintenance, not growth. What makes this vision unsettling is its emotional emptiness. There is no ideological conflict and no promise of rebirth. People cooperate out of necessity rather than shared purpose. Hope is replaced by routine. Survival becomes habitual rather than aspirational. Released during an era of nuclear anxiety, the film reflected fears about escalation and its aftermath. But its most striking warning is not about destruction. It is about what comes after. A future can persist long after collapse without ever becoming a future worth living in. In this world, tomorrow fails. Not because humanity is destroyed, but because it continues without knowing what it is trying to preserve. 10. The Final Countdown, 1980. The Final Countdown offers a restrained vision of failure rooted not in catastrophe, but in hesitation. Advanced technology places humanity in a position of overwhelming influence, yet that power produces paralysis rather than clarity. The future does not collapse. It stalls under the weight of responsibility. The film brings modern military capability into direct contact with the past, creating a scenario where intervention could alter history itself. The tools exist. The knowledge exists. What is missing is moral consensus. Authority hesitates, aware that action could save lives or rewrite the world in irreversible ways. The central idea of the film is that power does not automatically confer wisdom. Technological superiority creates ethical uncertainty rather than confidence. Institutions designed for defense struggle when confronted with responsibility on a historical scale. Doing nothing becomes the safest decision, even when consequences are known. What makes this future unsettling is its realism. There is no dramatic failure of systems or machines. Instead, human caution becomes the limiting factor. Progress creates choices that institutions are not prepared to make. The future is deferred, not denied, until opportunity quietly disappears. Released at the start of a new technological era, The Final Countdown reflected uncertainty about authority intervention and unintended consequences. Viewed today, it reads as a warning about decision-making at scale. When technology grants the ability to change outcomes, avoiding responsibility can be as consequential as acting recklessly. In this vision, tomorrow fails not because humanity lacks power, but because it cannot agree on how to use it. 11. The Philadelphia Experiment, 1984. The Philadelphia Experiment presents a future shaped not by collapse, but by secrecy. Society appears stable. Institutions function, and technological progress continues. Yet beneath that surface lies a pattern of advancement driven by military ambition and protected from public scrutiny. The future is built without consent, and its consequences are absorbed by individuals rather than institutions. The film centers on a classified experiment meant to give strategic advantage through advanced technology. What follows is not triumph, but loss of control. Human subjects are displaced, altered, or erased as unintended side effects of innovation that moved faster than understanding. Technology works, but no one involved fully understands its cost. The core idea of the film is institutional momentum. Progress continues because stopping it would mean admitting failure. Ethical concerns are secondary to strategic value. Responsibility becomes diffuse, buried inside classified decisions and compartmentalized authority. Individuals pay the price for systems designed to avoid accountability. What makes this future unsettling is the absence of malice. There is no villain seeking domination. Instead, damage occurs through procedure. Secrecy allows consequences to be treated as anomalies rather than warnings. Once technology advances beyond oversight, society loses the ability to question it, let alone reverse it. Released during a period of Cold War anxiety, the Philadelphia Experiment reflected fears about hidden weapons programs and unchecked military research. Today, its warning feels broader. When innovation is detached from transparency, the future is shaped by decisions most people never see and never approve. In this world, tomorrow fails because progress outpaces ethics, leaving humanity trapped inside systems it did not choose and cannot fully understand. 12. Cherry 2000, 1987. Cherry 2000 imagines a future where technology has not destroyed society, but reshaped it around emotional avoidance. Civilization continues, laws exist, and infrastructure remains intact. Yet human relationships are no longer central. They are inefficient, unpredictable, and increasingly unnecessary. The film is set in a world where artificial companions offer emotional consistency without risk. Intimacy can be purchased, controlled, and replaced. Human connection still exists, but it is fragile and optional. Technology provides an alternative that removes discomfort while preserving routine. The core idea of Cherry 2000 is not rebellion by machines, but voluntary substitution. People are not forced to abandon relationships. They choose predictability over complexity. Emotional engagement becomes a liability when technology offers a safer option. Humanity is not erased, it is deprioritized. What makes this future unsettling is how normalized the trade-off appears. artificial companionship is treated as practical, not controversial. Imperfection becomes a flaw rather than a feature of being human. Society adapts to reduced emotional depth and considers it progress. Released in the late 1980s, the film was often dismissed as eccentric genre fiction. Viewed now, its premise feels increasingly relevant. As technology mediates relationships and reduces friction, emotional distance becomes easier to accept. In this world, tomorrow fails not because machines overpower humanity, but because humanity willingly chooses systems that require less of it. 13. Cyborg, 1989. Cyborg presents a future where civilization has technically survived, but lost any sense of direction. The world has endured catastrophic collapse, yet the remnants of technology remain. Machines still operate, information still exists, and movement continues. What is missing is a shared goal beyond survival. The film follows characters moving through a devastated landscape where resources are scarce and human life is fragile. Technology that once promised salvation is reduced to an object of pursuit and conflict. Knowledge becomes valuable not as a foundation for rebuilding, but as leverage in a violent and unstable environment. The central idea of Cyborg is that technology alone cannot restore civilization. Without social structures, ethics, or cooperation, advanced tools become meaningless. Survival becomes transactional. Violence is routine. Progress is no longer measured by improvement, but by endurance. The future does not rebuild itself simply because information still exists. What makes this vision disturbing is its emotional neutrality. There is no villain shaping events and no ideology driving collapse. Humanity persists without purpose moving forward because stopping would mean death. Technology keeps bodies alive, but it does not restore meaning, trust, or identity. Released near the end of the Cold War era, Cyborg reflected fears about technological dependence without moral responsibility. Unlike more complex dystopias, it strips the concept down to its essentials. When systems fail completely, knowledge becomes data without direction, and progress becomes motion without destination. In this future, tomorrow fails quietly. Not because humanity disappears, but because it survives without knowing what survival is for. 14. Dark Angel, I Come in Peace, 1990. Dark Angel depicts a future that has not collapsed into chaos, but has been quietly hollowed out by crime and exploitation. Society still operates, law enforcement still exists, and cities continue to function. Yet beneath that surface, the systems meant to protect people are overstretched, reactive, and increasingly ineffective. Order remains, but it no longer serves the public good. The film follows a law enforcement officer operating in a city overwhelmed by organized crime and drug distribution. The arrival of an alien criminal does not introduce disorder into this world. Instead, it reveals how efficiently the existing system already supports exploitation. Addiction, violence, and profit-driven crime form an ecosystem that functions across borders and beyond meaningful control. The core idea of the film is not alien invasion, but systemic vulnerability. Technology improves weapons and surveillance, but it does not address root causes. Crime adapts faster than institutions, turning law enforcement into a perpetual response mechanism rather than a solution. The alien antagonist succeeds not because it is powerful, but because the environment is already designed to sustain predators. What makes this future unsettling is its familiarity. There is no dramatic collapse or moral awakening. Society adjusts to decay and calls it stability. Profit becomes the dominant logic, and human damage is treated as acceptable loss. Control exists, but justice does not scale with it. Released at the start of the 1990s, Dark Angel reflected anxieties about globalization, drug epidemics, and institutional fatigue. At the time, it was seen as a genre hybrid rather than social commentary. Today, its future feels less speculative. It suggests that when systems prioritize efficiency over accountability, exploitation does not need to conquer society. It only needs to participate. In this world, tomorrow fails because order continues to function while its purpose quietly disappears. 15. Wing Commander, 1999. Wing Commander presents a future shaped almost entirely by permanent warfare. Humanity has expanded into space, but not for exploration or cooperation. Technological progress is directed toward combat efficiency, faster decision-making, and tactical advantage. The future exists, but it exists inside a battlefield that never truly ends. The story is set during an interstellar war where young pilots are trained deployed and lost at an industrial pace. Advanced ships, navigation systems, and genetic enhancements are treated as necessities rather than achievements. Individual background or identity matters less than performance under pressure. Survival depends on speed, obedience, and adaptability within a rigid military structure. The core idea behind the film is not alien conflict, but human adaptation to endless war. Technology does not turn against humanity. Instead, humanity reshapes itself to function better inside a system built for constant violence. Enhanced reflexes and altered genetics are presented as progress, yet they reduce people to optimized components. Emotion, hesitation, and moral doubt become liabilities rather than safeguards. What makes this future troubling is its normalization. The war is not questioned. There is no serious discussion about alternatives or long-term consequences. Strategy replaces ethics, and sacrifice is treated as routine. Loss is processed quickly because the system cannot afford reflection. Technology accelerates decision-making, but it also accelerates detachment. Released at the end of the 1990s, Wing Commander reflected a growing shift toward data-driven warfare and remote military systems. At the time, its implications were overshadowed by its action-focused presentation. Viewed today, the film feels less exaggerated. Modern conflict increasingly relies on speed automation and reduced human presence, while accountability becomes more abstract. In this future, progress does not collapse civilization. It stabilizes it into something colder. Tomorrow fails not through destruction, but through adaptation to a machine that no longer asks why it exists. The futures shown in these films were never meant to be exact forecasts. They were constructed as stress tests, ways of examining what happens when technology advances faster than judgment, and when systems are optimized without considering who they serve. Looking back, what stands out is not how extreme these worlds appear, but how logical many of their outcomes feel. None of these futures collapse because of a single invention or decision. They fail through alignment. Efficiency replaces responsibility. Control replaces trust. Convenience replaces meaning. Progress continues, but direction quietly disappears. These films ask a simple but uncomfortable question if the warning signs were already visible decades ago. Why did they feel so easy to dismiss? Which of these futures do you believe comes closest to the world we are moving toward now? And do you see them as exaggerated cautionary tales, or as trajectories that are still quietly unfolding?